Back to my next video. Today's video is all about the case that shook the nation in 1988 in London. This is one that takes place in London, and it's always took place in London ever since the beginning of time. Jack the Ripper, however, was only a slightest. He was one of the world's most unidentified killer in the whole of Europe. So, back in 1888, Jack the Ripper would go into people's houses or spot young, innocent women, and these women were called the Canonical Five. These canonical women were called Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Now, if we go back to the background, in the mid-19th century, England experienced an influx of Irish immigrants who swelled the populations of many cities, including this happened in the West End of London. And Jack the Ripper was always a person that would just go in the dead of night. He just killed people, and he really would kill people in the dead of night, and then people wouldn't know who this person was because he slithered in very, very well. So this is where this murder takes place. It's murder of the east end of London. Now, this happened back in the 1880s and 1888, and this happened on two different times. So the Canonical Five were also a group, and they were found in different places in the West End of London. The body of Mary Ann Nichols, which was the first person to be murdered by Jack the Ripper, was found at 3:40 in the morning on Friday the 31st of August 1888 in Box Row. Now, if you go to Box Row in London, everything's changed since then. All the names of the streets have been changed, and all the buildings have been, torn down, and all they've been construction and turned into different names and valleys. But this was Box Row. So if you looked at London and all Box Row, and she was found in Box Row. Now, what's the difference between these two murders is Mary Ann Nichols was found in Box Row. Annie Chapman was found a few feet away from her on Hanbury Street of Annie Chapman. Annie Chapman was found next. This is the Canonical Five, and she was found in the doorway of the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, Springfields. Now, as I said in yesterday's video with the Soho murders, I ain't going to talk about the crime scene. I ain't going to talk about what happened to her. Let's just say all of these Canonical Five had an innocent sort of way that Jack the Ripper worked on. So, he sort of, took them from the back, and, some of the women had more insensitive injuries than others. Some had less insensitive injuries. Some had their kidneys taken out and delivered somewhere else. Some of them had their kidneys opened in the inside and pulled out the outside. And he would he would use all these techniques to lure it wasn't lure, they just were those women that got, anyway. So this case is one of the most heartbreaking. But for people in London, however, that was no jiffy. We know the story, we know the outcomes of what happened with Jack the Ripper. He was a skillful man, unidentified killer that was just, going around the city, going around, and his name was unknown, and as I said, the suspects were Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Marianne Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Now, since then, they were found, in a shallow grave and everything, and people have come across the thing. So the legend that still keeps on going was they still don't know who done it, and obviously there's loads of these suspects that people have gone through and gone around and everything. They believe that it was a doctor, believe it or not. They believe that there was a doctor that was the Ripper at the time, and he kind of involved around lots and lots of people. Now, Jack the Ripper, he sent a letter to the police, and this was regarding the thing of saying here is the letter. Dear boss, later dated 25th of September and postmarked to September 27th, 1888. Was received the day by the Natural News Agency and was forwarded to Scotland Yard on 29th of September. Initially it was considered a hoax, but then Eddowes was found 3 days after the letter's postmark with section of one ear obscurely cut from her body, promise authorised, and then he said, it doesn't really go, it said dear boss, which was one, and then Juicy Jackie was another. I don't really want to go into it because it just horrible. Now, ever since then, they have found out that the Ripper has been identified as Aaron Manoski, and he was one that was found to have done it, because he would have, Aaron Manoski at the time was a doctor who went into these different people's homes and, found out, the name and everything. But this has been London's most violent crimes against women for all of eternity. Now, I've only said to you one of the victims, identities, but I'll put pictures up of them in the names as well. Now, since then, there have been documentaries made on this. There's books that's made on as well, and there's also been, thousands of, documentaries called The Ripper on Netflix, which talks about not this, that it's